Alrighty guys, a very warm welcome to another video. Today I want to discuss creatine and how it can improve your triathlon Ironman performance. However, there are definitely some key considerations that you need to take into account, and this applies to anything really, any supplement, any training change, anything that you kind of alter or implement. You always need to consider, okay, what are the positives, what are the benefits, and weigh them against the negatives. So the first thing, actually, why don't we just start with the negatives? The bottom 2 points that I've got down there are weight gain and VO2, or the impact on VO2. Creatine can be associated 5 milligrams per day, 3 milligrams per day, with a slight increase in body weight in the realm of 1 to 2 kilos generally. This may vary between individuals. And so weight gain generally can occur with creatine supplementation, and this isn't just as a byproduct of extra muscle growth. It's more a byproduct of creatine shuttling or kind of drawing more fluid into the muscles themselves. Now, you need to weigh up again, well, is this weight gain going to be a negative impact, or the weight gain is fluid in the muscles? May that well actually be beneficial? You know, if you're ultra hydrating the muscles, well, that can be good. But for some people, it may cause cramping when they do become slightly dehydrated. So there's a lot of things to consider there. But weight gain can be an issue. The reason why I wouldn't necessarily think this is much of an issue for something like Ironman Triathlon is you're doing a lot of training. If anything, you know, weight gain or being overweight isn't necessarily a problem for most people. If you're a marathon runner or a Tour de France cyclist, maybe an extra kilogram of fluid in the muscles is going to be negatively impactful. However, for Ironman, really, most of the courses, like it's very negligible, in my opinion, that side of it. So that's one thing. The next thing is VO2, the impact of creatine on VO2. Most studies have basically, concluded that creatine supplementation in the short term doesn't really affect VO2. So VO2 is a very important factor for endurance, how much oxygen you can deliver to the muscles or around the body and utilize. So why would you want to supplement creatine if it's not going to improve your VO2 or anything like that? Well, most of the studies look at creatine supplementation in the short term, not necessarily in the long term. And by short term, I mean over a period of days to weeks, rather than long term, for example, months to even upward of like a year, for example. And so the actual impact on VO2, yeah, it's quite negligible in the short term. However, there isn't a whole lot of research on this, and creatine really has been researched in the context of anaerobic sports, short power-based sports that require high-intensity repeated bursts of energy. And if you think about that, well, it makes sense because creatine phosphate is the energy substrate which is utilized in those high-intensity bouts of, for example, sprinting in the first few seconds. So in supplementing creatine is going to increase your intramuscular concentrations of creatine phosphate. So, or phosphocreatine. So, it's one of those things where I think personally, through my own supplementation and my own training, creatine has been highly beneficial. And I do believe, but obviously everyone's individual, everyone's different in their genetics and in their composition and how they respond to things. This isn't any medical advice. And obviously before you take any supplements or whatever, make sure you consult a physician. So we'll get that out of the way. But creatine does have benefits for endurance. And the reason is this. It can certainly lead to improved recovery. And this is via reduced inflammation. This is via the actual increase in creatine stores in the muscle, which help to generate ATP, help to speed up the process of muscle recovery. So there's definitely impacts in recovery, or on recovery, and improvements on recovery. The next thing is mental reserve, and I didn't really know how to coin this, whether it was like cognitive reserve or capacity or function or just brain function in general. But creatine has been studied to have, quite significant impacts on the brain and cognition and one's mood and outlook. It's been studied in depression, and it helps depressive symptoms. It helps energy in terms of like mental energy when you're under stress, and reducing or kind of increasing your threshold or stress tolerance. And so if you're undertaking a very demanding training protocol, that is probably one of the biggest factors, or one of the most important things to be, if you can modulate how well your brain responds and how much cognitive reserve and mental capacity you have before things become overwhelming, well, that's definitely going to be an advantage. So creatine, in terms of the actual mental aspect of it, definitely, I believe, to be a big factor there, and you can't underestimate that. The next thing is the impact on training, and this comes into recovery, of course, but you're going to be able to train generally harder. So improved recovery will allow you to train harder, but also just the capacity to train at a higher intensity, because you've got increased creatine stores in the muscle, the capacity to buffer lactic acid better, and many other factors. But it's going to allow your training to be at a higher intensity and through many domains. For example, the effects on the brain, the effects on recovery, inflammation, and then just general muscle protein synthesis. It's going to allow you to train harder. And so this is where I think creatine has its advantages, not at all in the short term. Taking creatine the day of a race, it's not going to improve your race. However, if you were to supplement chronically, for example, 6 months of a 6-month training program, and then you looked at, obviously it's hard to do a study with one person, but it's going to allow you to train harder and have an increased threshold for that stress and that demand that's placed on the body. So this is where I really think creatine is a benefit. But you obviously need to weigh that up with, okay, it's not like directly going to improve performance. So that's maybe a negative factor for some people. And it can also lead to a tiny bit of weight gain. If you're doing a lot of endurance training, you're probably not even going to notice that. It's probably going to be like half a kilogram, if anything, because you're going to be sweating out fluid, etc. But you need to consider how you respond to things, and you need to consider the overall net benefit versus the potential drawbacks. And I think that creatine has always been viewed as something that's only for high intensity, those anaerobic type sports, and almost something that's like negatively impactful on endurance, because it's like, oh, you're going to gain weight. It doesn't really help at all. VO2 doesn't improve, etc., etc. But think about what like the most important thing in getting to the start line is in an Ironman triathlon. It's being mentally prepared and driven, and having that reserve of, actually getting up and wanting to do the training. So that's one thing creatine will help. It's the recovery and being able to actually adapt to the changes and to the demands you're putting on the body. And then it's just the training intensity and volume in general, and the demands that has on the body. And I think that creatine will increase your capacity to deal with those demands. And as a byproduct, it will allow you to become a fitter, stronger athlete. Obviously, there are drawbacks. Nothing is just 100% perfect. But in my opinion, creatine for endurance makes sense in the context of something like a triathlon, where you're swimming, riding, and running. Like I said, something like a hill climbing cyclist, maybe not. Maybe the weight gain negatively, impacts that. For someone like a marathon runner, maybe not, because half a kilogram of weight, 1 kilogram of weight could mean the difference between, winning or coming second. So definitely things to consider. But overall, in the context of what's most important for most age groupers getting to the start line of a triathlon, it's being mentally still in the game, it's being able to recover, and it's not getting injured, and it's being able to actually just day in and day out meet the demands and the stress induced on your body from the training. So that's where I think creatine really shines for your endurance performance. Not as a direct aid. It's not like taking caffeine and then having a direct effect, but from a recovery standpoint, that's where I think creatine really comes into its own. So Leave any questions below. Let me know what you guys think. And if you have experience with creatine supplementation, I certainly have, and I think it was beneficial. But obviously, you know, I want to hear all opinions, and let me know what you guys think. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.